You ever come home from a 12-hour shift fixing busted diesel engines just to find a metal barricade chained across your own ranch gate? Yeah, that was my Wednesday. Name's Randall Ashford. I've lived on this 5-acre stretch of Texas land for 8 years now, bought it fair and square. Built my house. Poured my sweat into fencing, brush clearing, and turning a weedy pasture into a respectable horse range. Never needed anyone's permission for anything until the HOA from the subdivision next door started sniffing around. They call themselves Maple Hills Estates. Sounds fancy, right? It's really just a bunch of over-mulched cookie-cutter homes stacked too close together, run by a bunch of retirees who think a clipboard gives them power. And at the top of this pyramid of petty, Regina Voss, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a voice like a dial-up modem. She showed up 2 weeks ago, uninvited, stomping across my gravel driveway like she owned the place. "You can't have this gate open like this," she said, waving her hand toward my ranch gate that opens onto a small private street. "It's not aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood." I leaned on my truck. "I don't live in your neighborhood." Regina gave me this tight, fake smile. "The HOA recently voted to extend our jurisdiction to the private road. It's now considered common access. And your gate, well, it's in violation. Now, here's the kicker, that little street. Technically, it's a private road owned by a now-defunct developer. It connects my ranch entrance to the main road, and I've been maintaining it myself for years, patching potholes, clearing snow." Regina must have figured since no one officially claimed it, she could grab it for the HOA. I told her to leave. She said she'd file a formal notice. 2 days later, I came back from work to find a steel barricade bolted into the asphalt right in front of my gate, chained, locked, with a smug little laminated sign that read, "For community use only. Trespassers will be fined." I stood there for a full minute, just staring at it. Then I called a buddy of mine who works in the county assessor's office. "Randall," he said after some keyboard tapping, "that road's not HOA property. It's still held in limbo by the original developers LLC, and guess what, they're delinquent on taxes. Can someone buy it?" he chuckled. "If they pay off the back taxes, absolutely." That night I wrote a check. $3,200. That's how much it cost to buy the entire road the HOA thought they owned. The next morning, I had a welding crew out there by 7 a.m. They cut the barricade clean off, hauled it into the back of my truck, and replaced it with a private road no HOA access property of R. Ashford sign. Regina showed up 10 minutes later screeching like a kettle. "You can't do this. This is Maple Hills property." "Nope," I said, holding up the filed deed. "It's mine now," she snatched at the paper. "This changes nothing. The board will vote to contest it." "Cool," I said. "While you're at it, I suggest you let the homeowners know their dues are about to go up." She blinked. "What?" I grinned. "Since I now own the road your HOA uses to access the subdivision, technically, that makes me your road maintenance provider, and I'm tripling the service fee. You'll get the invoice Monday." Regina turned redder than a fire hydrant. And that was just the beginning. By Friday afternoon, the invoice had been hand-delivered to every mailbox in Maple Hills Estates. I'd hired a courier from town, young guy named Milo, who delivered foreclosure notices for a living and didn't flinch when Regina Voss intercepted him on her driveway. He simply handed her the sealed envelope and moved on to the next house. Inside the envelope was a formal letter from Ashford Property LLC, newly formed, "Thank you very much," outlining the revised access agreement for the private road. The new maintenance fee was set at $900 annually per household, effective immediately. Late penalties applied after 30 days. By Monday, I had received 38 emails, some polite, some not, from homeowners demanding clarification. That afternoon, a man in slacks and a golf shirt showed up at my gate. He introduced himself as Stuart Langley, the HOA's treasurer. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, trying to maintain a neighborly tone. "You can't just charge us whatever you want. That's not how this works." I didn't invite him in, just leaned against the post and waited. "You're trying to extort us," he continued. "We'll get the county involved." "I already did," I said. "They transferred the deed. I own the road. And if your HOA didn't want to pay someone else's property taxes, maybe you should have checked who actually owned it before blocking my gate." He shifted his weight. "Our board will be discussing legal action. You're not going to get away with this." "Legal action's a great idea," I said, "because if we're going down that road, I've got questions about that barricade your board installed without a permit. I already pulled the code violations. There's no record of an easement request or construction approval. You altered a privately owned access road without consent. That's criminal mischief." Stewart blinked. That was a community safety measure." "Tell it to the sheriff," I said, and closed the gate. I didn't bluff. I'd already filed a report. Not with the local PD, they were a bit too cozy with Maple Hills Board, but with the county sheriff's office. A deputy named Grayson came out that same day, took photos of the damage left behind by the barricade mount, and confirmed the HOA had no jurisdiction there. "Looks like they drilled into someone else's property and obstructed access," he said, crouching by the bolt scars. "That's a chargeable offense." "Would be nice," I said, "but I'm guessing you're gonna need more than some holes in the road to make it stick." Grayson nodded. "Got any footage of them actually installing it?" I didn't. But I had an idea where to get it. That night, I paid a visit to the guy who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac, Tommy Hernandez, a retired lineman and the only Maple Hills resident I'd ever had a beer with. He didn't care much for the HOA, especially after they fined him for having a non-regulation mailbox. "I've had a trail cam pointed at that street since someone siphoned gas from my truck last fall," he said when I asked about it. "Caught a couple of raccoons and a teenager making out in a Corolla, but yeah, it should have seen them putting that thing in." He pulled the footage up on his tablet. Sure enough, there was Regina, flanked by 2 board members and a landscaping crew. They dragged in the barricade on a flatbed and spent the better part of an hour drilling and bolting it down. Regina even posed for a picture in front of it, arms crossed like she'd just conquered Normandy. I sent the files straight to Deputy Grayson. 2 days later, Regina was served. Unlawful obstruction of access, vandalism of private property, unauthorized construction without permit. It wasn't enough to put her in stripes, but it was enough for a court summons and a healthy fine. More importantly, it shredded the illusion that the HOA could act with impunity. But the real surprise came the next week. I was finishing up repairs on a stubborn transmission when a black SUV pulled into my drive. Out stepped a woman in a slate gray blazer, heels that didn't belong on gravel, and an expression that said she hadn't driven herself in years. "Mr. Ashford?" she asked. "Depends who's asking." "Aaron Dyer, Assistant District Attorney for the county. I'm following up on the charges filed against the Maple Hills HOA." I wiped my hands and offered her a chair on the porch. "We've received multiple complaints about that HOA over the past 2 years, she said, pulling a folder from her bag. "Selective enforcement, unauthorized fines, financial irregularities, but nothing substantial enough to press." "Until now," she nodded. "Your footage was the first hard evidence of coordinated illegal action. But what really caught our attention was the HOA's financial summary." I raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" The treasurer submitted it as part of their defense package. "It outlines regular expenditures for services that don't exist. Monthly payments to a landscaping company that dissolved in 2021. Pest control invoices from a company that no longer operates in this state. Thousands in consulting fees to an entity registered under a board member's nephew." I let out a low whistle. "That's embezzlement." "It's certainly suspicious," she said. "We're opening a formal investigation." I didn't say it out loud, but I was already imagining the next HOA meeting Regina trying to explain to a room full of angry homeowners why the county wanted their books. The only thing better than watching Regina get served was watching her squirm. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue, not for revenge, Not really. I just figured it was time the neighborhood got to know the guy who owned their street. I sent handwritten invitations to every house in Maple Hills and told them to bring their own chairs. To my surprise, over half showed up. Tommy brought brisket. A woman named Marissa brought deviled eggs. Even Stuart Langley came, his tie ditched in favor of a baseball cap and a sheepish look. I didn't know about half the things the board was doing, he admitted over a plate of ribs. I thought it was just petty politics. But money laundering, that's something else. They'll try to blame each other, I said, but the paper trail's clear. What happens now? I didn't answer right away. Behind us, kids were tossing beanbags in the yard. Someone had brought a cooler of lemonade. For the first time since this mess started, the place didn't feel like a battlefield. I think your HOA's about to collapse, I said, and that might not be such a bad thing, Stuart nodded. Honestly. I hope you're right. By the end of the night, I'd collected over 24 signatures from residents asking for a special election to dissolve the current board. Not reform, not revise, dissolve. Turns out, all it takes to turn a neighborhood against a tyrant is a paper trail, a road deed, and a pulled pork sandwich, and I still had cards left to play. The following Tuesday, I got a call from Deputy Grayson. His voice was clipped, more formal than before. Randall, you got a minute? I need you to come down to the sheriff's office. We've got something you need to see. I asked if it was about the charges against Regina and the board. He didn't answer directly, just told me to bring any documentation I still had from the road purchase and the HOA's response to it. When I arrived, Grayson was waiting in the hallway outside the conference room. He nodded toward the open door. Inside sat Aaron Dyer, the assistant DA, along with a tall man in a charcoal suit I hadn't met before. He introduced himself as Special Agent Marcus Leary from the state's Financial Crimes Unit. Mr. Ashford, Leary said, flipping open a manila folder. Your purchase of the road led us to uncover a broader pattern of activity inside the Maple Hills HOA. This is no longer just a zoning dispute. He laid out a series of documents and photos across the table. Turns out, the barricade incident wasn't the first time Regina Voss and her board had crossed the legal line. Over the past 4 years, they'd orchestrated a scheme using the HOA's renovation fund to funnel money into shell contracts, bogus companies registered under relatives, and fake service providers. Each of those entities had been siphoning dues into personal bank accounts scattered across 3 states. Aaron Dyer leaned forward. This goes beyond your neighborhood. The same names show up in filings for 2 other HOAs about 50 miles from here. Same pattern. Inflated invoices, non-existent services, and no oversight. Grayson added, the barricade gave us probable cause to dig into their books. But what we found, that opened the floodgates. Agent Leary slid a photo across the table. It showed a warehouse outside Amarillo, bare walls, empty shelves, and a Maple Hills maintenance truck parked out front. According to their accounting records, it was supposed to be a fully operational landscaping hub. Over $170,000 in equipment was purchased for that location, Leary said. Not even a shovel inside. I stared at the image, then back at the room. So what do you need from me? Leary tapped the folder. Your purchase of the road disrupted their cash flow. The increased fees forced them to move money faster than they were used to. That's when they got sloppy. We need you to testify that you were threatened with fines and obstruction when you challenged their authority, and that your acquisition of the road exposed their misuse of common funds. I nodded slowly. You'll get my full statement. Dyer gave me a look. Not pity, not concern. More like respect. We expect arrests within the week, she said. I left the sheriff's office with a strange feeling in my chest, not quite satisfaction, not quite relief, more like gravity. I hadn't just rattled a few power-hungry neighbors. I'd poked a hole in something bigger. And now it was unraveling fast. By Thursday, Regina's face was plastered on the local news. She'd been arrested at her house just before dawn. Alongside her, 3 board members were also taken into custody, 2 men and a woman, all charged with fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of community funds. The footage showed them being led out in handcuffs, faces hidden behind jackets and folders. The HOA's office, a glorified shed behind the community pool, was taped off by investigators. Neighbors stood outside in robes and coffee cups, watching as stacks of evidence boxes were wheeled out. Regina's mugshot hit the internet within the hour. I didn't share it. I didn't gloat. But I did forward the news article to every resident in Maple Hills who had signed that petition at my barbecue. The next day, I got a call from Stuart Langley. "Randall," he said, voice lower than usual, "we've scheduled an emergency town vote, Saturday afternoon. Our bylaws allow for dissolution of the board if 2/3 of homeowners agree. We're already past that threshold." "Good," I said. "You should have had control of your neighborhood a long time ago." He paused, then added, "Some of us are thinking about forming a new committee, but only to manage the basics. Maintenance, security, stuff we actually need. No fines, no roadblocks, no power trips, just neighbors helping neighbors." I didn't say anything at first, just let the idea settle. "Let me know if you need help with that," I said finally. "I've got experience now," he laughed, tension breaking for the first time in weeks. That Saturday, I didn't attend the town vote. It wasn't my neighborhood, and I figured they needed to handle it themselves. But later that evening, a convoy of cars pulled into my drive. Tommy Hernandez at the front, followed by a dozen other residents, some I knew, some I didn't. They brought folding chairs, leftover barbecue, and a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "Thank you, Randall, our road to freedom." Tommy helped me hang it on the fence post by the gate. "You're not just a neighbor anymore," he said. "You're the guy who bought the street and gave it back to the people." I didn't know what to say to that, so I went and grabbed more beer from the shop fridge. As the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, laughter broke out across the yard. Kids chased each other around the fire pit. A woman named Deanna passed around a tray of lemon bars. Someone had brought an old radio and tuned it to a classic rock station, the kind that played nothing but guitars and grit. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. By Monday morning, the newly formed Community Maintenance Committee of Maple Hills had filed their charter with the county. 5 volunteers, no salaries, full transparency. They asked me to attend their first meeting, not to vote, but to speak. When I stepped into the rec hall, every seat was full. Stuart stood at the front, beside a whiteboard with the words "Rebuilding Trust" written in blue marker. Before I could say a word, the room stood up and clapped. Not loud. Not dramatic, just honest. After the meeting, a woman in a denim jacket approached me. She looked about 60, with weathered hands and a voice like riverbed gravel. "I moved here to retire in peace," she said. "Thought I was crazy for thinking something was wrong. You proved I wasn't," I nodded. "You're not crazy, you were just outnumbered," she smiled. "Not anymore." Later that week, I got a letter from the county clerk. The title for the private road was officially updated to reflect the new maintenance agreement. Ownership remained with me, but the use rights were now shared under a no-fee access covenant, an agreement I'd drafted with help from a local attorney and signed in front of a notary. Maple Hills could use the road freely, permanently, without paying me a cent. Because the truth is, I never cared about the money. I cared about being bullied on my own land. I cared about people like Tommy getting fined over mailbox paint. I cared about a community being strangled by people who were supposed to serve it, so I gave the road back, not because they earned it. Because they finally stood up and took it. The weeks that followed brought a strange kind of quiet. Not the uneasy silence that comes before a storm, but the kind that settles in after one has passed, when the wind dies down and you realize the fence is still standing. Maple Hills was no longer run from a clipboard. The new committee operated off a folding table in the community rec hall, and their first act had been to open the books for public review. No one had ever seen a full accounting before. Now it was pinned to a corkboard next to the lost and found bin. I didn't attend their meetings regularly, but I'd stop by when they asked for input, especially when it came to road maintenance. After all, I still owned the road. Parking enforcement, snow removal, even mailbox placement, all of it had to be restructured. It was tedious, but it was honest work. And unlike before, nobody was trying to win a power struggle. They were just trying to live without drama. Then, out of nowhere, something happened that threw the entire neighborhood back into the fire. It started with a property audit. The county had begun investigating other HOAs in the region after Maple Hills fell apart. They didn't say much publicly, but Aaron Dyer hinted that the fraud they uncovered wasn't isolated. That same week, one of the Maple Hills residents, an older guy named Burke who kept to himself, got a letter from the county land office. It claimed his lot lines didn't match the recorded plat map. He mentioned it in passing to one of the committee members, who then checked their own boundary. Same issue. By the end of the week, 9 different homeowners all found out their backyards were technically sitting on land that wasn't part of their titled property. Stuart called me one evening while I was replacing a barn door hinge. He sounded like he'd been up all night. Randall, listen. I think Regina and the old board may have altered the subdivision plat to expand the lot sizes. The county says the official map on file was never approved. I sat back on the porch step, hinge still in my hand. You're telling me they forged a plat map? Looks that way. The original developer filed an approved version 15 years ago, but the one the HOA's been using is different. The boundaries are stretched just enough to tack on an extra 5 or 10 feet per lot. People built sheds and patios on land that technically belongs to a dead LLC. You think they did it to inflate property values? Worse, to justify higher dues, more square footage, more fees. I stood up and dusted off my jeans. You need to call Aaron. He already had. By the next morning, the county registrar issued an emergency freeze on all property transactions in Maple Hills. Nobody could sell, refinance, or resurvey their land until the boundaries were legally clarified. Panic set in fast. Homeowners who'd never even attended a meeting were suddenly showing up at the rec hall with folders, receipts, and nervous questions. Aaron Dyer arrived 2 days later with 2 investigators and a civil attorney from the State Land Commission. They spread out maps, compared filings, and started knocking on doors. I stayed out of it until Stuart came by with a folder Regina had left behind in the HOA storage closet. He handed it to me without a word. Inside were 3 sets of plat maps, one stamped and signed by the original developer, one that matched what the county had on file, and one with hand-sketched additions, extended lot lines, fake surveyor initials, and a forged timestamp from 7 years ago. Underneath the maps was a letter. It was from Regina to another board member, someone named Dorian Keyes, a name I hadn't heard before. The letter was typed, but Regina had signed it in pen. It read, "If we push it through quietly, no one will notice. The extra space will boost home values and we can revise dues accordingly. Just make sure the updated map gets filed before the next fiscal cycle and destroy the old one." I drove straight to the sheriff's office. The letter and the forged map were enough for the state's attorney to file a second round of charges. This time, they weren't just financial. They included forgery, falsification of government records, and unlawful encroachment, all felonies. Dorian Keyes was tracked down in Nevada and arrested at a golf resort where he'd apparently been living off HOA funds laundered through a fake landscaping contract. The fallout spread fast. Insurance claims were frozen. Homeowners had to apply for boundary remediation through the county's correction program, which meant months of paperwork and legal filings. But the worst part: the structures built on those false boundaries, sheds, decks, even a guest house, were now subject to removal unless easements were negotiated. The new committee, to their credit, didn't panic. They met with every affected homeowner, helped them draft petitions, and worked with the county to secure temporary usage rights while the legal mess untangled. As for Regina, her bail was revoked when the new charges came down. Her attorney tried to argue that it was all a clerical error, but the signed letter and 3 witness testimonies from former board members undercut that defense fast. She was remanded to county jail pending trial. Erin called me a week later. "She's looking at serious time now," she said. The fraud charges alone could have meant probation, but forging land documents, that's a different league. I didn't ask what kind of sentence they were seeking. I didn't need to know. All I cared about was that no one else in that neighborhood would ever be able to pull something like that again without someone noticing. A month later, the county held a public hearing to finalize the road access covenant I'd initiated. It was made permanent, recorded into the land records, and legally protected from any future HOA interference. I sat in the back corner of the room, arms folded, listening as homeowner after homeowner stood up to thank the board for their transparency and apologize for not paying closer attention before. When it was over, Erin found me outside, leaning against the tailgate of my truck. "You know," she said, "when you bought that road, I doubt you knew you were kicking over an anthill full of felonies." I glanced toward the courthouse, where a county clerk was still stamping copies of the final order. "I didn't do it to play hero," I said. "I just wanted to open my gate," she smiled without ceremony. "Well, you opened a lot more than that. That summer, I finished the barn extension I'd been putting off for 2 years. With the road issue settled and no more barricades in sight, I poured gravel down the new drive and added a split-rail fence to keep the horses in during storms. Neighbors started waving again. Some even dropped by to lend a hand or drop off tools. Tommy brought me a set of solar lights for the gate. "So no one ever mistakes who owns this stretch again," he said, planting one at the corner post. I never rejoined the committee. My name stayed off the signs and the minutes. But whenever they needed backup legal, structural, or just someone who'd seen how bad things could get, I was always just down the road. The last thing I did that year was mount a new sign under the old one that read, "Private road, no HOA access." I added a smaller plaque beneath it, just a piece of scrap steel I'd ground smooth and painted myself. It said, "Property of the people who paid attention," and that was plenty.